Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth webinar series named Troubleshooting Digital Dentures on Dentca Design. As usual, if you have any questions throughout the lecture, please feel free to type them in the chat section, and then as soon as the lecture is done, I will answer them the best of my ability. Today's topic is really important. I feel like there are a lot of questions out there regarding Dentca Design that people kind of feel confused about. There are certain nuances to the design process itself that people would like clarified. So I think this is a very useful lecture for that kind of type of information, what to do if you get stuck, what type of files we're looking forward to obtain, and what's going to work best, what's not going to work best. So let's proceed with the lecture. So I always like to introduce the lecture with this small design overview, but basically, normally you would get your records, you would scan them, and then we will go through the Dentca Design process, which you can see on the right side. And the process itself, I'm gonna talk about it in a lot of detail, but basically what we'll do is we're going to align the upper and lower arches to our bite. We're going to establish a trim line. We're gonna set our landmarks, then we're gonna set the teeth, and then we send it for final generation. Once the design is done, we can either print a trine or a final and then redesign if we need to, and then either create another trine or another final. So in the design stages, what do we recommend? So in the first portion of this lecture, we're going to talk about what files we need to get and what these files need to have. So the files that we need to have a good relationship. They need to have a certain quality, they need to be in a certain format, and they need to have a specific size. So let's go with relation first. So relation is very important. If you are scanning your impressions, or if you're doing a wash directly on a denture and then scanning it yourself, it's very important that you always make sure that there are areas that are matchable between your bite and your intaglio. So in this example, we can see that in the intaglio, we extended all the way to the teeth. And in the bite one, we extended all the way to the intaglio if possible. If not, at least try to have similar areas. So in this case, we can actually match this by utilizing the central and the lateral. So we always need to make sure that we have 3 points to align and that these are evenly spread out throughout the area. The reason I like to clarify this is because what we get a lot is what you see on the screen. People will just scan the intaglio on one side and then they'll scan the bite on another, and there are no points to match in here that we can use to align one with the other. So it's very important that they both have points in common that we can use to match. Second point is quality. Quality is very important. So we need to make sure that there are no double layers. These double layers usually are created when we're scanning intraorally or when we're scanning with an intraoral scanner. And they usually happen because we move forward and then some area does not scan properly and we go back to it. And what it does, it creates a layer on top of a layer. And these are very troublesome because it confuses the software a lot and they're very tricky to eliminate. So if you're scanning, it's very, very important that you're careful not to create these double layers. Next session, we're going to be talking about what the best practices are for record taking. So keep this information in mind for the future. Also, it's very important to make sure that the impressions we're going to be using don't have any holes in them. If they have some holes, they need to be patched up. Now, in order to patch these files up, if they have double layers or if they have holes, we can use Dentca's internal repair function. Please keep in mind that this is still in beta stage, so it might fix some of your issues, but it might not totally fix them in its entirely, especially if you have very nasty double layers. So ideally, you wanna fix them outside as best as you can. My recommendation is try the beta first. If it resolves all your issues, you're good. Otherwise, take it to a different software and try it out. So in order to do this is once you start your order and you start a design on Dentca Design, you will get the file upload screen. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the process later. But on the screen at the bottom, you'll see a section that says repair intraoral scan file. Make sure you check that box. It usually appears when you're about to upload the upper gum files. And if you check that up, as soon as all the files are uploaded, the software will clean these out for you. Now, let's say that the software could not clean these out, or you don't want to use the beta for some reason, then you have two options. There are two great softwares out there that you can use. One of them is NetFab and the other one is MeshLab. Both of these services are free, so you can download these programs and you can use them yourself. All the functions that I'm going to mention are on the free version. Of course, each of these have a paid version with advanced functions, but we don't really need those. The simple things that we will do, such as patching or converting, can be done on the free versions of the softwares, and they can be found on the email on the website addresses that you can see below each of the names, in case you want to download them yourself for your lab or your dental clinic. Now, I personally feel like the best tool out there for patching any issues is NetFab. So NetFab has a very simple approach to how to patch these up. For example, it'll show all of your impression in green, and the red areas that you see are usually holes. So it can kind of tell you where something is wrong, and it'll give you a big triangle with an exclamation mark at the bottom, letting you know that there's something wrong with the impression or with the scan. And then you can just select the little cross that you'll see on the upper right to kind of patch this up or repair this up. And in there, you can just right click on the holes and choose the close hole function, and it's just going to close the hole. Very simple, very easy. The only caveat is if the hole is pretty big and it has to repair a lot, it's usually going to do it in a flat way. It's not going to follow the curve of the impression. So you might need to keep that in mind and try to have as little amount of holes as possible when scanning. Or you can select select some of the triangles, and then basically whatever is green, then you can hit delete and it's going to remove that. And then you can select whatever shell is floating and also delete that. That is mostly used for removing double layers. And then there's an all automatic repair function as well that basically patches everything that's still open or triangles that get flipped sometimes. So you just select default repair and execute, and it's going to do an automatic repair for most of your impressions, which is really helpful, I think. Then let's go a little bit into the design part so I can explain some things, and we're going to go back to the other 2 points that I wanted to cover. So normally when you're about to place an order online, you go to dentca.com, and this could be the first issue that you encounter with. You go online, you type the website name, and you get this error that says, sorry, your current browser is either outdated or unsupported. And the solution is basically, if you're using Explorer or if you're using Edge, try to use other platforms such as Chrome, Firefox, or Safari, and make sure that those are updated to their latest version. Usually they are, but always make sure that's the case. And then the page should just load fine. Then once you're in the page, click on the Dentca Design section and then click on Create Project, and then go to the section that says Dentca Design. And this is where we start our design process. And that's going to take you to that screen I was mentioning before with the beta. And then what we're going to be doing there is we're going to be dragging whatever file it asks us to. In this case, it says upper gum. And so we're going to drag the maxillary in first, then the mandibular, then the bite in that order. And then the second issue that you can have is you can get this error that says invalid file type. Only STL files are supported. And usually that takes us to the third point that we were going to talk about, which is format. So you need to ensure that all the files that you're uploading to the Dentca system are binary STL files. So if your files are in OBJ format, PLI format, DCM format, or even .stl that says ASCII, that's a different type of STL file, they need to be converted to binary STL files. And doing this is incredibly simple. You can either use NetFab or you can use MeshLab. Basically, what you do is you just open your scan and then right-click on the file name and export it as, and then you have all these options. So all you have to do is select STL, and it's going to basically save it on a different format, kind of like what you would do with Paintbrush or any format where you want to change the picture format from PNG to JPEG or that kind of stuff. It's essentially the same thing we're doing. We're just basically saving it on a different format. You can do this in MeshLab as well. Basically, you just click on file and then export mesh as, and same thing, you just select STL and it's going to do it as well. So both of them are pretty easy to use in that sense. And then the third issue that you can encounter is that when you drag the file in, it's going to tell you that the file size seems to be too large. And it doesn't mean that we can't work with it, but what's going to happen is that if your files are greater than 50 megabytes, the process of processing the information that you submit and going from one step to another is going to be slower. So instead of taking maybe a minute to process something, it might take 5 minutes or 7 minutes. So if you don't want to wait that long and you don't want to struggle with this, what you can do is you can reduce the size of your files. And I'm going to show you how right now. So the recommended file size for faster processing is between 8 to 20 megabytes. So of course, getting something down to 8 megabytes might be very difficult, especially if it's within the 50 or the 100 megabyte size. But 20 is fairly reasonable. By the way, the reason this sometimes happens with your intraoral scan files is so you keep this in mind when you're scanning, is that the more time you spend scanning, hitting that button and scanning the areas, the heavier your file becomes. So you might want to try to scan as quickly and accurately as possible without having to go back to specific areas, because every time you keep that button on, the file size increases and you can easily end up with a file that's 80 megabytes, 100 megabytes, 120 megabytes. So that's one thing to keep in mind, and we're going to talk more about that in the next session. So in order to reduce the file size of your files, you would open it on MeshLab. Then you go to where it says filters and select from the drop-down menu where it says remeshing, simplification, and reconstruction. And then you're going to select the one that's at the bottom in the red square, which says simplification, quadratic edge collapse decimation. And what that is going to do is it's going to open this small page. And you might want to look at the section that says percentage reduction. And basically what you want to do is you have to tell the computer by how much you want to reduce it by. So for example, if you want and this has to be expressed in a value between 0 and 1. So let's say you want to reduce something 30%, you need to put 0.7. So you want 70% remaining. So basically you just have to subtract from 1. So you turn it into a decimal, 0.3 minus 1, 0.7. Same thing if you want 20%, then you type 0.8. So in the case, for example, let's say you have a file that's 50 megabytes, you want to reduce it to about 25, then you would need to put 0.5. You can obtain this number by dividing as well. You can divide 25 by 50 and you're going to get this number, which then you can input over there. And then once you add all your files, you will move to the next section. Now, I'd like to make a small parenthesis here. A lot of people ask me, okay, well, what if my files are pre-aligned and I don't have a byte file? If that's the case, just re-upload the maxillary as a byte during the first section to bypass that screen, and then I'll tell you what to do when we reach the alignment section. When you get to this part, you will have to enter all your patient information. So the first thing that I want to mention, and that is very important, that you make sure that you're doing an immediate denture, you select yes if you want the software to remove the teeth for you. If you already removed the teeth, let's say you took a model and you ground those down, or you already removed them with another software, then select no. And this is very important because if you select yes and you have no teeth to remove, you're going to have a lot of errors. Same thing, some people will say yes to immediate denture and they don't intend to do an immediate denture. That creates a whole set of errors. It sounds simple, but it happens a lot. And then the second thing to consider is what you're uploading. So basically we have 3 options. You can have your scans for your wax rims, your cast, or intraoral scans, or your impressions or dentures if you took a wash on a denture, or the Dentca trace. So if you took impressions with the Dentca trace, you will see another section open below it where it's going to ask for the upper lip length. This is a measurement that's taken with the Dentca lip ruler, and it's only applicable to Dentca trace. So if you didn't take that upper lip length or you didn't use the Dentca trace, make sure you do not select that. Otherwise, it's not going to let you move to the next stage without entering a value. And this is the lip ruler, just for those who don't know it. It comes with the Dentca starter kit. Then it's going to ask for the overjet. and the classification. So this is for the anterior overjet. You can ask for class 1, 2, or 3. If your patient is on class 3 and it's an extreme class 3 or it's an extreme class 2, don't go for a class 1, because what's going to happen is later on, and I'll show you this error, you're going to get a huge space between the canine and the premolar, and it's really hard to correct rather than letting the software fix it for you initially. There is a way to go around that, but better select it right from the start. And then you're going to select the molds. We have several molds that you can use. You can select the mold shape. We have various molds available depending on the type that you select, and then the sizes as well. And then you can select different arrangements, masculine, feminine, standard, etc., as well as the height of the post-dam. There is a no post-dam option. Please do not select the no post-dam option. This is mainly for when you want to work on cases that you previously worked with and you're applying a wash. But for the first time, always select 1.25 or 1.5. And it's recommended if you're doing immediate denture to always select the light festooning style, because the gums are going to be bulky as it is. You don't want the festooning to be too aggressive. And then the final output is going to be printed. There is also going to be an option where you can add a crossbar or no crossbar to your design. This is basically to increase your chances of printing success on lower arches. That's only if you really want it. It only increases it by 5 to 10%, and then you're going to select the printer. So that is going to take you to the next step. So on the next step, we're going to be working on alignment. And basically what you have to do is you have to select the same spots on the bite that you would select on the arch. So we've been through about this. You have to set 3 points. Each point is a little bit different in color and in shape. So it's very simple to use. It's very user-friendly. And then you're going to do the same thing with the lower, and then you're going to be taken to a screen where you're going to be verifying that your matching is correct. Now, here's a very short video. I'm going to skip through some sections, but basically this is everything that I explained. You're dragging the files, and then you're going to do the lower. This is the section where it says if they're pre-aligned on the bite section, just redrag the maxillary, and I'll show you what to do. It's going to process. So just fill out all these sections. I'm going to skip it right now because we already spoke about it. And then in the next section, you can rotate, you can move, you can rearrange the position of everything. You can make it larger, you can move it around. And then you're going to be setting the dots. So basically what you want to do is you want to make sure that these dots are the same. As you can see, you know, red with red, you can move those dots if needed. And then, you know, green with green, and then yellow with yellow. And then you click on lower, and then you'll do the same with the lower arch. And once you're done, you basically do the proceed. So one thing that you can do is if they're pre-aligned, where it says save and next, and I'm going to show you right now, there should be a button that says skip matching. So you can do that in order to bypass the screen if your arches are pre-aligned already. So basically, like I said, upload the maxillary as a bite and then click on the skip matching section, and don't put any points if the arches are pre-aligned. Now, this is an issue that happens very commonly. So when you go to your verify your matching section, you will see that there's only one of the arches in there and not both of the arches. Both arches should show as pink, and then your bite should show as purple. So if this happened, it's very likely that you put both the upper and the lower dots on the same area. So make sure you have this oriented the right way. It usually happens with wax rims because they sort of look the same. So make sure you're putting the dots where they should. Once you go from upper to lower, all the upper dots should turn gray. They should still stay there so you can see them. So if you're putting new dots over the gray dots, then you're doing something wrong. So always make sure that they're in the right arch. You can see the mismatch as well, where the arch itself does not match the shadow of the bite. This is, I guess, a very extreme situation, but basically what happened is you didn't put the dots in the position where they should have. Instead of the left, you put it on the right, or vice versa. So all you have to do is basically move the dots to where they should, and it should work out just fine. Then on the next step, basically what we're going to be establishing is a trim line. Establishing a trim line is very, very simple. All you have to do is go in a circular motion until the line's completely joined. And then just check in your verification screen that everything looks good. So everything that's going to go away is going to turn red. Everything else is going to stay in a pinkish color. So here we can see a video. It's very simple to do. All you have to do is basically hold control and start clicking where you want them to go. I would recommend just going around first, and then if you need to move the dots, move them later. But yeah, by selecting any dot, you can just drag it back to its position or hit delete and it's gonna go away. But basically you might wanna close the circle first, and then you also want to avoid seeing any squiggly lines. And then once you're done, you go to the lower. Very important as well is if you're doing a single arch, you still need to trim that opposing dentition. Otherwise, you're going to get an error, and we're going to talk about that a little later. If you see one of the lines go under the frenum, don't worry about it. It's still going to trim it properly. Okay, so that's basically the trimming step. So if you get an error like this, where you see a red line going over the tissue that should stay, this happens sometimes. The dots could be placed in the wrong way. What happens is sometimes people go back to an area and then they want to return. You don't want to do that. That's why I said you want to go in the circular motion, is because if you go back and forth, it's going to confuse the software and it's going to create a cut where it shouldn't, or an extension where it should not. So always make sure you go in a circular motion rather than going back and forth trying to fix things. And then the other error that you could see that happens more often than you think is this. So you could see the entire arch at the bottom either completely red or completely pink. And that is usually happening because of double layers or holes. Basically, the software cannot trim it properly. These double layers usually happen at the sulcus section, which is where you trim. So it can cause an error and cause the software not to be able to work it out. So if by this point you're having this issue and you did select the beta, unfortunately, the only way to fix this is going back to NetFab, patching it up, and then re-uploading the files. And then this basically is just a short mention, but if you did choose to do an immediate denture, there's going to be an extra step that's going to appear between trimming and landmarks, which is called extract. And in this section, basically, you're going to be adding trim lines around the teeth that you want to remove. So let's say you want to work on the first area where you see the lines, then that's number 1. Then once you're done marking your circle there, you would click on number 2 and then mark a different tooth, and so on and so forth until you're done. And then we're going to go to part 3, which is the landmark placement. As far as landmarks go, there's only 3 landmarks that you need to place in the upper. The first one has to be the incisive papilla. It's going to be a red dot. And then we're going to add 2 more dots in the posterior section in the hamular notches areas. And then on the lower, we're basically going to select the return molar pads. Once you do that, you should be able to move to the next section. I'm going to skip this video because it's essentially just right-clicking and adding the points, and it's pretty straightforward. And then once you send it to verification, there could be a couple issues that you encounter. And then the first one is you could see an error that says an error occurred while process initializing teeth setup. Normally, when that happens, you're going to get an email or a notification letting you know that this error has appeared. Or the other thing that could happen is that when you click on verification or teeth setup, you just see a looping screen that just loads the case endlessly and it doesn't do anything. So if that's the case, it usually happens because you're jumping back and forth. So let's say you're on landmark and then you figured something was wrong. So you click on trim and then you click back on landmark. Ideally, you don't want to be doing that. So you want to just go and fix things as they appear during the verification screen rather than jumping back and forth. But if that happens to you, don't worry about it. The only thing that you need to do is click on landmark instead of clicking on verification and resubmit it again, and it should work this time. That's a small workaround. It's a little bit of the software gets confused because it already had a pre-saved version, let's say, of the matching, and then you went back and create a second one, so it doesn't know which one to read, and it's basically part of the reason why it sort of goes a little bit crazy. And then on the verification step, you're going to go through several screens. The first screen that you'll get is a mesh of the actual base with the bite. So you wanna see it kind of like it looks like it's spray paint. You want to see a uniform of both colors. You don't want to see too much of one color. Then the second one is going to be a confirmation again of what it's going to trim. It's going to look transparent. And then you're going to get a third part where you can actually adjust your occlusal plane. The software calculates it ideally based off of your landmarks and your vertical dimension. And if you entered an upper lip length, then it's going to use that as information as well. But you can modify it in here. You can tilt it to every angulation. So basically on the video, it's going to show you the different areas, and then you can adjust the occlusal plane as you're moving. Just so you know, that red line in the middle is your midline. So if you see it's mismatched from your wax rims or from where you want it, you can rotate it and adjust it. So if you drag it with the mouse, you'll move it. And if you hit the rotate button up there, or if you hold the shift button, it's going to turn into rotational movements. And that's going to allow you, that's going to create those wheels that you can use kind of like rotated. So I like to see it like kind of like when you open a door. So you have to imagine that you're moving that doorknob in the direction that you want to rotate it. And then many times when we're going through these verification steps, we'll see something like this. So it might be a little bit small, but instead of keeping the inside of the lower arch, it's keeping the outside, and it's telling you the inside it's going to go away. And if you move past this, that's exactly what's going to happen. And this is usually caused because we placed our landmarks outside the trim line. So the software thinks that the part you want to keep is the outside and not the inside. So every time you're placing your landmarks, you need to make sure that these are not over the trim line or outside the trim line. So they have to be inside the trim line, like this. So the solution is basically just going back to the landmark section and then just moving them, and then you can move forward. And if you get an error when it's trying to create the teeth setup, it's most likely because you had your landmarks in the wrong position. Sometimes people do this where they put the red one that's supposed to be the incisive papilla somewhere else, or they place the landmarks on top of the teeth on single arches on the opposing dentition. As much as possible, you might want to avoid putting your landmarks on the teeth, on the occlusal surface, because the software uses this information to relieve the teeth, and it can confuse it a little bit. If there's no other choice and your trim line is very short, put them on there, but as much as possible, you might want to put them on top of the tissue and not the teeth. Or if there's no choice, try to put them on the distal section of the tooth instead of the actual occlusal surface. And the solution to overcome this problem is just place the landmarks in the correct position. And then you're going to be taken to the last screen, which is tooth generation. So on this screen, you're going to be able to do a lot of things. You're going to be able to, move the teeth, rotate the teeth, move them as a set individually. You can remove premolars. You can adjust vertical dimension. You can do anything you want with the teeth setup. You can switch it from a class 1 to a class 3, or you can change the tooth size or tooth shape. And basically, I'm going to skip around, but it kind of shows what you can do. But you can check the teeth setup. You can select one tooth, and then you can either move it or rotate it. You can do it as a group. And then you can also mirror them or move them around together. You can also remove with the right side. You can remove premolars or molars. You can check the contacts, and you can adjust the VD as well with the toggle bar at the bottom, if you want to kind of play with it. So sometimes you'll get this. You will get the teeth who are tilting down or tilting up. I, of course, created this artificially, but normally what would happen is the occlusal plane would be following the shape of the teeth right here. And this basically just happens if you have a particular wax rim and your arches are quite rotated, you didn't adjust it properly. So you can either go back and adjust the occlusal plane and regenerate the teeth, or you can just basically adjust them directly on the teeth setup section. Okay, and then something else that you could have is the issue, as you can see here on number 11, where you get a gap between the posterior teeth and the anterior teeth. We already kind of covered this, but it essentially is caused by choosing a class 1 when something should be a class 2 or class 3. So one way to overcome it is basically just go to the change teeth on the teeth section and select a different type of occlusion and regenerate the teeth, and that should basically fix everything. Or you can move the teeth if you want, whatever is simpler for you. Sometimes we could get issues like this where the anterior teeth are moved out of position and then they look all jumbled up. Normally this is because the landmarks are not in the right position. So again, you can either rearrange the teeth or you can rearrange the landmarks and generate the teeth. Another issue you could encounter is this error when you're about to send to generation on your on the final step. You can get this error that says that the distance between the lower and the upper is too close. And this basically is telling you that the vertical dimension is very limited, and it's going to create these two little red dots that are saying that when the gum shells generate, the gum shells would be hitting one another. So the way to go around that is playing with the toggle bar and basically moving this toggle bar until these dots turn green. At the bottom here, it's going to tell you how much distance you need to open it by. So for example, in here, we're 0.7 millimeters short. So you need to open it by 0.7 millimeters. So you can either go by that number or open it until the dots turn green, and that means you're in the clear. If you find that an area is requiring you to open VD a lot, maybe what you want to consider is trimming a little bit shorter, maybe on the lower. Maybe you overextended these streams and that's why they're hitting one another. So you might want to consider that as an alternative if you find yourself having to open BD by like 7 or 8 millimeters. That could be because of the overextended trim as well. And then once you send it to finish, final generation normally takes about half an hour to an hour, but you can start a new case right off the bat. So that's one really good benefit of this, is that you don't have to look at the screen or you don't have to wait. You can do different cases or go and do some other stuff. And eventually you're going to get an email letting you know that your case is finished or that you got an error. So if you do get an error, once you send it to finalize, there could be several reasons for that. One of the reasons that I have seen is that people try to remove only one second molar, and what they do is they just select that one tooth and try to take it away, thinking that's going to work, but unfortunately the software is still going to try to generate with that molar in mind. So unfortunately in this case, either you remove all second molars or none at all. So don't try to do this, it's going to cause an error. So you have to make sure that's not the case. Another cause for errors that happens a lot is if the tooth is actually intersecting with the border of the intaglio area, you will get an error happening. So you want to make sure that either you move that one tooth to a different height so it's not touching. You can either move it lingually or you can lower it a little bit just so you can see that line over there at the border or the trimmed area is unbroken. So the teeth can pierce through like you see in the molar, but you don't want to see this section like in the premolar where they're separated. So just rearrange the teeth and it should generate properly. And then one other cause is basically the trim the opposing dentition. If the opposing dentition is not trimmed, you could also get an error because the software is trying to determine how much of its teeth to alleviate, but it's not trimmed, so it's triggering an error. So always make sure you're trimming the opposing dentition on single arches. Also, if the landmarks are in the occlusal section, like I mentioned, you could get an error. Or you could get this, and this happens a lot. So if you're trying to generate and you get an error, hide the existing teeth, and you're gonna realize sometimes that you were doing an immediate denture, but you did not do the extract step, or you forgot to set this as an immediate denture and you selected no. So if you're doing an immediate denture, you need to remove the teeth during the extract step, otherwise you're gonna get an error. You cannot, the software is thinking that the teeth are part of the tissue, so you cannot have teeth and tissue occupying the same space. So it's driving the software crazy. So always make sure that you remove or crop the teeth with the extract step. And then there are some other issues that could happen that are not basically not your fault. Like if you get something generated in a weird way, just let us know. There's a support section on the area where you can send us a message, and we're usually going to respond within a couple hours, unless you you message us on a late Friday, of course, we won't respond until Monday, but we try to be very proactive about it. So usually if you message us within our business hours, we should be able to respond fairly quickly to your issue. And basically all you have to do is type and hit send, and we're going to get a message. And we will reply to that as well. You're going to get an email with our response, etc. If everything generated properly, it should look like this. It should say completed. Once you go to completed, you will see your design, as you can see at the bottom, and then you can check out through the checkout process, make your payment, and then you can download the files. So it's fairly simple. If it says completed, just basically click on the completed section. It's going to open your case. You can just see it and then make sure that everything looks good, looks as you want it to look. And then on top, there should be a download section where you can just basically download your files or order 3D printed. And then once you download, it should look like this. It should show all the individual files as well as your initial impressions. If you don't see something like this, then let us know, but there should be at least a zip file or something that you can download. If it's completely empty, let us know. That's all I have for the day. I hope this helped you sort of learn to troubleshoot the different issues that could happen with Dentca Design, and it's going to make your designing process a lot smoother and a lot easier. I'm going to see if there are any questions on the chat right now. If you need to reach me later on, here's my email address and our information. So we got a question here that says, does the trim line determine the width of the denture flange? That is correct. So wherever you trim, that is where it's going to create a flange. It does give it a little bit of thickness. So if you were to leave it at knife edge, it's not going to end up at knife edge. It's still going to give it a little bit of bulk because the denture base needs to be at least 2 millimeters in thickness. But let's say that you overextended and your borders were border molded very aggressively and you have 4 millimeters and you capture the whole sulcus, then yes, your denture thickness will be about 4 millimeters. So you want to keep that in mind. If you overdid the border molding and it's, if you underdid the border molding and it's very thick, try to trim a little shorter. Can it be brought out wider towards the landline? Yes, you don't have to cut through the middle. I recommend cutting through the middle, but if you want to extend a little bit, then you can extend it for sure. What part of the incisive papilla? Well, the incisive papilla is a little area, so you want to make sure that dot is centered on the center of the papilla. And the retromolar pads, basically where the pads are, you want to do it about halfway through the retromolar pad. That's what I prefer. I like things centered, but it doesn't really affect that much what you do. There's one last question here that says real articulator. I'm not really sure what that means. But if you have an articulator, you want to scan it, then yes. Does our software emulate a real articulator? Then the answer is yes as well. All the movements of vertical dimension closure happen in a rotational manner and not a hinge. So yes, it acts like a real articulator in many aspects. Okay, I think those are all the questions for today. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. As I said, if you need to contact me, here's the information. If you want to share this video later on, we're going to upload it on Facebook. And if not, I will be seeing you all in about a month where we're going to be discussing the impression section, which is the last of the clinical aspects. And then the very last one is going to be about the profitability of digital dentures. If you like Dentca 4, next week on Friday, we're going to be offering a webinar for Dentca 4. So if you're interested in all on 4s and all of that, send me an email and I will register you. And then we got this question here that says, can you explain the file upload again? If you're scanning with the byte included for an upper and lower case, there are 4 files, not 3. I imagine that you're talking about when you're scanning the left and right byte. It says no. So when you're uploading the file, you need to have a upper, lower intaglio, and then a byte. So when it says maxillary, you upload the maxillary. When it says mandibular, you lower the mandibular, and then the bite. So if you have wax rims, for example, what you want to do is you would scan the intaglio. So you would put the stone model facing up with the intaglio facing up, and you would scan that. You would do the same thing with the lower, and then you would put the stone models together with the wax rims, and you would scan that bite. So you would obtain your third bite file. And you can even drill little dimples on the stone to facilitate the alignment. So in the end, you would obtain 3 files. So you would obtain upper stone, lower stone, and then the bite, which be both stones with both wax rims put together. So if you're scanning those, you can use rubber bands and put them together when scanning. I'm going to talk about that during our next session, but basically, yes, that is what you would be doing, like you saw in the demo file. So you want to make sure that the front of the wax rims is properly scanned. All right. I hope I answered all of your questions. You can always send me an email if you have further questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I'll see you soon.